Hello, everybody, and welcome back to my podcast, Soulpreneurs Secrets. And today I would love to introduce you to my dear friend, Lucy Thom, whose secret is all about how to have courageous conversations. And she's called her method the Courageous Conversation Space. So, Lucy, thank you so much for being here. And we'd love to hear your story.
Great. Well, thank you. And thank you very much for inviting me to have this conversation with you, Deborah. It's a real pleasure and privilege. So I trained in mediation several years ago now. And through facilitating mediation meetings, what I noticed was that the people who were having the most effective conversations were those who were having the courage to be vulnerable. And there'll be perhaps no accident that it's something I've struggled with myself. So it's been a very humbling experience, and something that, along with a health issue that I've had since 2007, which affected my breathing. It was basically tissue growing just near my vocal cords, which is, of course, all about expression and communication. That really led me to look into this in quite some depth. And what I realized was that very many people struggle to really speak authentically, to really say what they want to say. It's really easy when we want to say lovely things. Oh, that was great, or what a fantastic event that was, or whatever it is we're talking about in a positive way. When we're struggling with somebody, though, that's when it can take a lot more courage. And I just realized that I wasn't alone with having some problems with and challenges with some very often it's our nearest and dearest, which that in itself is quite a conundrum, because we love that person and yet there are things they're saying or doing which we're really struggling with. How do we actually broach it, though? So hence the Courageous Conversation Space as a framework for supporting people to find their voice. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. Would you tell us, I know you've had, and this is a bit off topic maybe, but I know you've had an amazing background, and I'd love the listeners to hear a little bit more about your background, and maybe it's got relevance to this as well, because I find that, everything we do all through our lives contributes to what it is that we, eventually find is our mission, our purpose.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you're right, there is relevance, because before I had kids, my first career, if you like, was in professional sailing. So I worked in sail training as a skipper and an instructor. And I also then worked on quite a big project, sailing around the world on an old beautiful wooden boat, with the man who I was then going to marry, who I was going out with, Jim, as the captain. And we had a crew, and they belonged to a lovely Swiss family. And they would join us for mostly the cruising parts, and we would do the ocean passages. Occasionally they joined us on the ocean crossings as well. So the relevance is that on a yacht, you're living and working in quite a confined space, and especially when the conditions get challenging, it can feel even more confined. So the parts of the boat that we would potentially go to get away from it all would be up the mast or on the end of the bowsprit, which is fine when the conditions are lovely. In fact, it can be a wonderful experience. But of course, you know, when things are more difficult, which is precisely often when communication starts to break down, people are under a bit more stress. So and what I found was that, as well, I was the mate, Jim being the captain, and the mate's role is very much to be like a go-between, like the bridge between the skipper and the rest of the crew. Anyway, and I guess it had been my role a lot of the time, you know, just growing up. So there were times, and one is springing to mind immediately, when somebody needed to say something. You know, the elephant in the room, I think we've all experienced elephants in rooms. Well, on a boat, when the elephant is taking up most of the deck, or most of the below decks, where, you know, there isn't much space left and something needs to be said. So without any training, I was finding myself often lying awake at night, really having some deep thinking about how can I broach this something needs to be said, how can I do it in a way which brings calm to the situation and at the same time gives space for people to be heard. And so that's really where I think when I was having had the children, I was thinking, okay, what should I do next? I'm not going to go run away back to sea just yet. So I decided to actually take on some mediation courses, which I absolutely loved and wished I'd been able to access, you know, all those years before at sea. But
And were you able to resolve the issue on the boat? Did you find a
well,
way?
yes. What was amazing was, in particular, this time we were a very remote part of the Pacific, and we did have the owners on board, which was unusual for an ocean crossing. And yet everybody was struggling with the atmosphere on the boat, absolutely, and it was affecting us all. And it had been going on for some days, and I started to sense that it could potentially actually jeopardize the safety of us on board, because especially when the weather gets challenging, which in the Pacific it can like that, quite unpredictable it can be. Mm-hmm. We need to be a really cohesive team. You know, we need to be, the trust needs to be there, and there needs to be like a good vibe for us to work together. So having had one of those sleepless nights, I actually walked into the cockpit area at the back of the boat, which is unusual to do that uninvited. And I invited myself into the owner's space, and I said, would it be okay for us to have a conversation? And the image that had come to me in the night was of a bridge, and that was what needed to be built. And so luckily they said, and all credit to them, you know, they said, yes, absolutely, you know, have a seat. And I just said, I'm just sensing that you're deeply unhappy about something. And I want to know if you're prepared to talk about it, and perhaps we can resolve it. And we had immediately this big conversation, and the owner expressed his frustration at feeling left out of the decision making. And what that made available and made possible was a conversation about how very often sailors, I think goes for lots of people in lots of jobs, by the way, not just in sailing, but where you get a sixth sense about that it's just time to tack, or it's time to jibe. That means change direction, alter course. And you can't necessarily explain it like logically, but you just know it needs to happen. And when the owner heard this, and you know, he because he he hadn't been a sailor all his life or done the miles. I mean, Jim's, you know, sailed around the world 4 times. So he couldn't appreciate that there was that aspect to skippering a yacht. And when he heard it, oh my goodness, he went and slapped Jim on the back in a really friendly way. Look, you know, just tell me I'm being an asshole next time, would you? And, you know, tell me to leave you alone. And it just broke this sort of curse that had been hanging over the boat. And actually that night we were hit by a squall that turned it out to be a bit more of a storm, and we were all working together, and I was just so thankful for whatever people want to call that divine guidance, inspiration that had come to me in the night, to have that conversation.
Yes. Can I add a little story of my own in here, because it's slightly different, but maybe it relates as well to what it is that you share in your mediation work. So as you know, I was also, well, I was on just 2 sailing trips, but I was also on my big sailing trip. It was not quite around the world, but it was around the UK. And it was over a month, and it was split into 3 legs. I was on the whole thing. But some women were only on for 1 leg. But there was one woman who was on for the first leg and the last leg. And she was the science lead on the first leg, and I was the science lead on the second leg. And I know I'm very sensitive to when people, you know, tones of voice and things they say. And I can be easily floored by things that people say to me. And I was having to go and lie on my bunk for 2 hours most days after something that she had said to me. And it was totally ruining my trip. And I could tell that she was stressed. I knew that on her part, it was to do with stress. And she wasn't teaching me any of the science or anything. So I was starting to get stressed. And after she left, the second leg was such a relief, you know, not having this constant sort of, I felt like I was just being bitten all the time. And I knew she was coming back for the third leg, and I was like, I'm gonna have to find a way of dealing with this. I don't know how to deal with this. And eventually it suddenly hit me that actually, although she got on really well with everybody else on the boat, there was something that wasn't quite right there either. And I realized that actually she found it really difficult to communicate with people, that she just didn't know how. It was like she had a social awkwardness about her. And everybody else got, you know, laughter and hilarity, and I didn't. I got snappiness. As it was, later on, I met her mother and realized I was the same age and looked almost identical. And she spoke just like that to her mother. So I thought, oh, you saw me as your mother. But before she came on the third leg, because I suddenly hit me that she had a problem, it meant that when she came back, I was able to have a lot more compassion for her. And whenever she snapped at me, I would just turn it into a joke. She said to me once, and don't be late. And I thought, I am never late. If there's one thing I am really good about, and that is punctuality. But I just threw it back at her, and I know, you know me, I'm always late, you know, and I just sort of threw it back as a joke. And that started to break the ice. But but I really had to step back and realize that, yes, I had a problem in the way I was responding to it, but that actually I wasn't putting myself in her shoes and seeing the challenges that she was having. So is something that you see, that we don't put ourselves into the other person's shoes.
Yes, and it was wonderful that you were able to do that, though. I mean, I don't know, had you been able to have a conversation with anybody about it, or were you talking to the universe?
I was talking to the universe. I had passed it by one or two women on the boat, but I couldn't really discuss it because everybody else, you know, we was, as you say, you're in such a close knit environment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I mean, it's
yeah.
interesting, isn't it, that, see, I didn't really realize then that I was talking to the universe. I can see it now. That's what I was doing, because who could I, you know, middle of the Pacific. This is also the late 90s, early 2000s, so that we didn't have these satellite phones on board. And I think that is key, though, because for us to have compassion for someone else, I think we need to feel heard first. And I really did. I really felt heard.
By the
And
universe, you mean?
yeah. Yeah.
Ah.
And not only that, but was given, you know, literally given an image to keep, you know, hold on to that image when you go to have that conversation, that you're building a bridge. You're not, you know, so go in with compassion, go, and that's how those words came to me, to know what to say. So
that's really interesting, this thing about, you know, communicating with the universe. You know, we call it communicating with the universe. I mean, you know, I always say to people, we're not our minds, we're not our feelings, we're not our body, we're something else, you know, something higher. And we can communicate with that part of ourselves. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, I think some people interpret it differently, don't they? Some
Yes.
people would say, oh, well, you were talking to God or
Yes.
source, or, but yeah, I see what you're saying. You're saying, well, maybe I was just tapping into my own higher self, which does have that direct connection with
Yes.
consciousness. Or
so I think some people really struggle to actually have that conversation, or to have clarity in that conversation. Can you say a little bit, have you got any little tips that you can share with people about how to actually get that guidance to have that clear, open conversation with the universe or your higher self, or whatever you want, whatever you choose to call it?
well, yes, I think it can, you know, it's an individual thing. I think it's a personal thing, and for some people, it will be going for a walk. If you know, obviously, I couldn't do that. That's another place where I go and be with the trees, especially an old oak that there is in the forest near where I live, to reflect on things. Otherwise, yeah, lying in bed with, I mean, on YouTube there are some amazing there's amazing healing music to have on, isn't there, these days, in the background. Using music as well can be a way in. Ultimately, though, it really is being vulnerable and asking for the help, realizing, you know, actually I do want help, whether that's the higher self that then responds, or, you know,
Yes.
there's something in the quantum field or some divine energy, who knows, really. I think that's all still a mystery, isn't it? But
Yes, but there is, of course, that quote, you know, that ask and you will receive.
yes.
And certainly sometimes, you know, I will just say, I need help, I don't know how to deal with this, and then let it go. And but it is, it, in order to hear that, we do need to give ourselves a quiet, settled space to be in. It's not going to come if we're just rushing around all the time, and particularly if we're just running on stress, it doesn't come then. It's like somehow we have to settle ourselves down, don't we, and have a quiet space, or just be highly attentive. Sometimes I can just say, I really need help here. I don't know what to do. And then I can be in a conversation with somebody else and they'll just say something. I'll go, oh, yes, that's what I needed. But we won't know that we're being given that unless we've actually asked.
True. Yes. Yes. I think that's the thing, isn't it? And it's okay. It's okay to need help.
Oh,
It's okay to be vulnerable. And
yes.
I think that's why with the courageous conversation space, I do invite people. I use the word distress because for me, stress, okay, it can be that life-saving adrenaline rush to leap over the fence away from the angry bull. But whereas distress is like an ongoing, like a chronic situation
Right.
of stress. And so, yes, how do we, first of all, because I think we're really good at, I'm certainly been really good at distracting myself in the past, or pretending that I'm okay, really, when I'm actually not. So to invite people to look at that and realize that there is something that's, could be so much better. But first we have to sort of look at the pain point, and realize, well, is this a conversation? Sometimes the conversation we're not having is the one with ourselves about,
Yes.
I do need help, or in denial. So, and then looking at how exactly that, how to get that inspiration, access that courage as well.
Yes. And not to blame. I find
Absolutely.
that I mean, certainly I know I was like this, and until I started to realize that maybe the other person actually had a problem. It was them that really was struggling, and I was picking up on that, and taking it on board myself. But prior to that, I would blame. I would say, and they said this and they said that, and this was terrible and that was terrible, and it just go on and on and on, and you never get it. It never resolves itself in
No.
that point. It's just a downward negative spiral, and yet we're so sort of in condition to do that. All the media, that's what it is, and and they said this, and and we spoke earlier a bit about creativity, and it would be nice to sort of bring that in now, because that's what I'm all about, is helping people live a more creative life. And I don't just mean doing your knitting or your sewing. I mean in terms of the conversations that you have, the relationships that you have, and how, and for me it's all about how how can we have the opposite of distress? How can we be in a higher
Thrive.
place? Yes. How can we be living on our happy hormones and not on our stress hormones? And particularly at the moment with the astrology, because we've got such a Piscean influence at the moment. Saturn has gone into Pisces, and Pisces is all about compassion. And the Dalai Lama says it's going to be compassion that saves the world. It's going to be middle-aged women doing compassion that's going to save the world. That's his thing. And the more I look at compassion, the more I think about it, and how it has to come from a place of unconditional love, but we can't unconditionally love anyone else until we unconditionally love ourselves, because love thy neighbor as yourself. And so there's so many layers to it, aren't there? But recently a friend of mine, it was, sat there for about 3 hours, and they did this and they did that and they did this and they did that. And I said to her, have you ever considered that actually they're really struggling? What do you mean? I'm struggling. I said, yes, I know, but have you looked at their struggling? How much challenge they're having? And as soon as we do that, it just brings the energy down, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And that's really what I feel for me is about the creativity in a conversation, is how can we bring the energy down from this, as you say, this quite distressed place to a much calmer and more peaceful place. And that
Yeah.
seems to me is that connection that you were talking
Well,
about.
I think it is this thing of this compassion, this energy of compassion, which is how you resolved your situation on the sailing boat.
Yeah.
And ultimately, what came to me to approach the owner with compassion, look, you seem really unhappy,
Yeah.
rather than we'd all been moaning about how stressed and unhappy we all were feeling. And then it was like, yeah, but the owner's unhappy. Let's find out what's going on for him. So I think that is a key. And this business of unconditional love and loving ourselves, wow, that's a whole journey of acknowledgement, really, and forgiveness, and that most people, I believe, if not all people, really have good in them, are of the light.
Oh, absolutely.
And yet it's through trauma that instead of being guided by the light, we end up with this injection of dark energy coming in and just knocking us off balance, really. And parents, I've been a parent now myself, but I can see that my parents, there were lots of things they did that were amazing and wonderful, and there were some times when, that actually, yeah, it did leave me traumatized. And I say traumatized because I put it in the past because I've resolved them now, so it's no longer trauma. I think Gabor Mate is amazing on all that, actually, Dr. Gabor Mate. So going back to this business of communication and creativity. So yes, if we're going through life constantly held back with this niggling sense of worry or stress, and I think this comes up a lot in situations of codependence and dependence. So how do you have the conversation with the person who's, might be a partner who's paying the bills, but also stopping you from growing because you're undermined by the interactions you're having together? Could be the same thing with a family member or a person at work. And this is where with compassion, I think we've got to look at asserting boundaries. And that's really hard if you're a people pleaser, though. Especially hard if you're a people pleaser, because that's been your survival strategy, your coping mechanism. Again, from probably programmed in from a really young age. And I think it was realizing all this, that my parents were only doing their best. Their parents had been doing their best. And I, as a kid, was just, really came into the world to have fun, actually, and learn. And, that you talk about that a lot, don't you? This lovely energy of just wonder and curiosity at the world and trial and error. I mean, thank goodness toddlers don't have, and babies don't have that inner critic, because can you imagine trying to learn to walk if every time you fell down you had this voice in your head going, oh well, that was rubbish, wasn't it? I mean, unfortunately though, most of us do have quite a loud inner critic, which can kick in exactly when we need it the least. And so it's also just learning to see where that's come from, and to turn the volume down on that voice, and then realize if someone's challenging us, if we're finding somebody challenging then it's probably that they're feeling challenged, like you say. And that can be quite a surprise for people, to actually be asked, well, tell me what is going on for you. Because often in our busy lives, we're meant to just be kind of not having this identity of, yeah, I'm on track, I know what I'm doing, and I've got everything covered. We don't really give a lot of space or time to just sharing our struggles.
No, that's true. And for some reason, I became aware that, why did I think everybody else was going to be perfect? Why did I ever think everybody else, should be reasonable and yeah, and talk properly, like, yes. And another thing that I find quite common, unfortunately, is and I suspect it comes from people not feeling heard, that I hear people in conversations, and it's all, yeah, well, I this and I that and I this and I that and I this and I that, and as you say, it sounds quite defensive. It's like, but I need attention, I want it, I need it. And and I find that that is a killer on a conversation, and that it's we're much more likely to have a really fabulous, learning, growthful, heart-to-heart conversation if we're asking the other person, tell me what, I want to know about you.
Yes. Yes, in a way that can deal with that sort of unmet need, if you like. If you straight away let them know that you're all ears. I'm all ears. And then I think what's key is, so you were saying about your friend, that she was, yet again, sort of complaining about whoever the person was in her life, or is,
and I like to do that a lot.
That's challenging, yes. And the thing is, we do need to be able to do that, by the way. In nonviolent communication and in my mediation training process, it's important to be able to just go blah, and be heard, because having done that and acknowledged that, now I can have compassion for myself and have compassion for the other person. I think if we try and jump straight into having compassion for someone without first acknowledging and feeling heard, whether it's by the universe or by a good friend who's willing to hear you, or a mediator, because it's part of my mediation process. Not all mediators work like this. In the approach that I'm trained in, prior to a joint or a group mediation meeting, I will always meet one-to-one with each participant. And that is absolutely their opportunity to just be heard, as well as me explain a bit more about the mediation process and things like that. But the main aim of that one-to-one is for that person to be absolutely heard. So, and often that creates a shift, to the extent that a joint or group mediation meeting might not even be needed. Just that process of hearing people. So it is something that we could actually all learn to do in our communities. And I know some people are doing this in their workplaces and in their local communities, just learning how to actively listen. And so that there are, there's a lot of healing coming in, I think, with. And to go back, though, to your point about creativity, so if we're not having conversations that we really need to be having, and it's causing us distress, then from what I've learned from listening to you and what you've drawn my attention to, is that absolutely can put a dampener on our creative energy. Because if we're under stress, then that, well, number one, that's draining, isn't it? It can cause physical issues, like in my case, very much so. It did. Some people, it might be indigestion, something not requiring hospitalization. But in my case, it absolutely required hospitalization. And so, this business of being creative, that's who we're here to be, isn't it? In all our own fabulous individual ways and unique ways. To be creative is how we can make our communities, our families, our world in how it's really could be, which is flourishing and abundant. And it does require those conversations, though. And I think what's coming to me, actually, this is quite interesting, because it's just coming to me now, is this business of healing. To see these conversations, rather than, oh gosh, this is difficult and challenging and it's a conflict. The opportunity of conflict is healing, isn't it? That's, if we take that compassionate approach.
Yeah. And so, I'm thinking, a few instances recently of people sharing with me, and and what has come out is always go and see it from their point of view. What's going on for them? Put yourself in their shoes and see what's going on for them. And then maybe you realize why you're feeling triggered or feeling upset by whatever's going on between you. And one of the things I've noticed is that when people are able to see that, and they're able to go, yeah, okay, they are having a really hard time, or that must be, really difficult for them, or whatever, that because then that automatically then brings down our own stress response, our own distress response. And so, because then we are more settled in our own energy, that what we then emit, and it can't. You okay?
Yeah, I'm just losing you slightly. I lost your voice there a minute.
Okay, tell me where you lost it.
Yeah, just go back slightly. I'm just checking my signal. It is fine. Yeah.
No, it's more like mine. So when we're able to listen to somebody else and go, oh yeah, okay, I can see you're having a really hard time, and that maybe a lot of what I'm hearing from you is your own distress. It's nothing actually to do personally with me. You're just dumping it on me. And when we can hear that and we can go, okay, and just bring our own energy down, then because, we are emitting, energy, electromagnetic, energy from ourselves, if you like, or our aura, or whatever you want to call it, we're creating a field around us. And if we can bring the energy down in our field from stress or distress to a more peaceful, however little we can do, bring it down, then immediately our field interacts with the other person's field, and it can't help but bring their energy down. And I feel that the power we have as individuals to diffuse a situation, just bringing our own energy down.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And goodness, we do seem to have a mainstream media that wants to do the opposite. very polarizing a lot of the time, isn't it? The headlines. And so the invitation, I think, is even more so perhaps to have, well, you talk about a daily practice of retreat, by which you mean just some quiet time, don't you? It doesn't necessarily mean retreat as in, go and disappear to the mountains for a month. Just that quiet. It can even be arriving somewhere, even if one's running a bit late because of traffic or whatever the reason might be, or perhaps especially if one's running late because we can get a bit more flustered. Just take 1 minute to focus on one's breath before you get out of the car. That can make a big difference, can't it?
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I think there are challenges out there for everyone, and on multiple levels. So much censorship as well in the workplace.
So I'm sort of getting two main tips for people to take away. So one is just to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and
well,
hear.
could I actually just invite you to put those in a different order?
Go on.
Because I think, firstly, it really is important to recognize your own struggle, suffering, need for help of some kind or support, and then to ask for that in whatever way that is. Whether that's a friend who you can rely on for calm wisdom, or speaking to the universe, tapping into your higher self, calling on God, saying a prayer, whatever your language is around all that. That's fundamentally got to be the first step, I think.
Okay.
Because then, invariably, you will be on the receiving end of compassion first. So that then shifts your energy and enables you to then have compassion for the other. So
fabulous.
Yeah. And take that approach. If someone's being challenging, if their behavior. Oh, and another big tip is it is home in on the behaviors, the actions, the words of the person, rather than demonizing the whole person, as it were. Just say, when you speak blah blah blah, not even you make me, that I would really avoid saying you make me. To say, this is how I feel when I hear you say this, or when I see that. So
that's such a good point. That's such a good point. And in fact, I was recently on that MTV Teen Mum show.
Oh, yes.
One of the things that I discussed with this young woman, it's actually part of the film, is I say, if you blame the other person for what you're struggling with, then you have handed over your power to that person. You have made yourself the victim, because we all have complete freedom of choice as to how we respond to someone else. So someone could say something really nasty to us and we can go, am I going to get really upset, or am I just going to stay calm and wonder what's going on for them? And so we can either be the victim, or we can stay in our power.
Yes. And staying in our power, you're absolutely spot on there, Deborah, is about the self-compassion, the compassion for the other, the stating, look, I am struggling. So what is really going on for you? When you're speaking like this, and this is how I'm feeling, what are you really feeling? What is going on for you? So those three sort of steps, if you like, those three parts to that approach.
Fabulous. Yeah. I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much, Lucy, for coming and sharing your wisdom with us and having this really interesting conversation. It's what it's really what the times need right now, isn't it?
Yeah.
So to, as you say, to bridge these divisions that we're all feeling with each other.
Yes, absolutely. And well, thank you, and thanks for this opportunity and for all that you're doing as well. It's absolutely fabulous.
And if people want to get hold of you, what's the best way?
Well, the best way is through Succeed from the Start at the moment. I'm part of a collective, if you like. Succeed from the Start.
From Start. Is that a website?
Yes, I'll send you the details for that, and then you can include them underneath the podcast. Brilliant. Okay, thank you.
See you soon.
Lots of love. Bye.
Yeah, lots of love.